Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the last tutorial where I showed you how to kind of procedurally model and texture bricks inside of Houdini 100%. And now I wanted to kind of go over how you could then take those really high resolution meshes, but then lay them out, stack them, say, in a spinning fashion like this, but still do it in a render efficient way because each brick is close to 1,000,000 polygons. So you can't just copy thousands of bricks and render all that. That's going to be crazy on your machine. But this approach that I'm going to show you is actually going to be render efficient. So let's dive right in. All right, so I'm going to just drop down a new geometry, and this is kind of picking up off the last tip file. So if you want to continue on from where you were, we had 3 separate types of bricks. We had a full, a partial, and a no damage brick, just to kind of give some variation. So from here, I'm going to just call this layer bricks. We're going to dive inside here, and I'm going to reference the already created bricks that we had. So I'm going to use an object merge. I'm going to type up to these dots, just basically represent going out of essentially a directory, but out of this layer. So if I go one set of dots and a backslash, that comes as if it's going to then look at any nodes inside of here. And if I do another backslash, well, double dots backslash, then it will then bring up all of the nodes that are actually one layer above this, which is this context. So I'm going to essentially reference these bricks that are textured right here. So I'm going to jump back in here and reference the create bricks, and then I'm going to get the texture full damage, hold down Alt, and then click and drag, and you can just duplicate a node really easily. We can do, let's see, grab the partial damage brick, and then grab the no damage brick. Okay. The next step, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to transform these bricks to its centroid. If I just hook up a transform, move to centroid, now it's in the center of the brick. And to zoom in on a piece of geometry, you can just in the viewport, if your mouse is hovering the viewport, you can hit space G, and it will kind of just zoom right in there, so then you can kind of navigate easily there. I'm gonna Alt drag, click that just to make sure it's at its center, and here as well. And the reason I'm doing that is because we're going to be creating a system where we're actually just copying these bricks into their proper location. So that being said, we're going to just name this brick 01, brick 02, and brick 03. So in order to make the spinny bricks that I wanted to, what I'm first going to do is essentially just lay out a proxy version of my brick. So if you drop down a box and then connect it here, it basically just encapsulates that or takes a bound of the actual brick. You can also do it with a bound node. But the reason I'm going to do that is it's going to make it faster since this is a high resolution mesh here. But now if I do this, this is like 6 polygons. So now I can lay out my bricks exactly how I want them to. So let me just transform this maybe over 0.1, maybe 0.2. Okay. And I'm just going to start transforming bricks. Just maybe get an initial setup here. If I click move to centroid and then click on this button here, I can now kind of move this a lot easier. I'm going to click on the reference here to kind of template where this brick is while I don't know why that's not showing up there. I'll just merge these together so just to make sure it shows up properly. But yeah, I'm going to rotate this. And in Houdini, it's going to be a free rotation here if I'm rotating around the Y, but if you hold down Control, you can have a perfect like 90-degree rotation, which is nice. So I'm going to lay this brick out here. I'm going to drop down a mirror to then just mirror that on the other side. If I press space 2, it gives me the top view here. Just going to line this up. It doesn't have to be perfect because bricks normally wouldn't be laid out perfect. Okay, so now I could take this, mirror this whole thing across. We have our Z axis. Okay, and we notice that that's a little bit far. So what we could do before then, just to make sure the spacing of these bricks is kind of all even, drop down a transform before this mirror node, just kind of tuck it in. If I hit space 2 just to be exactly on top, I'm going to kind of just line these up so they visually just look about even to that. Okay, so we have one layer of bricks here, and now we can drop down a duplicate node, and we can then raise this up, and I'm going to hit in the viewport space 3 to kind of have this view again, just to kind of see my spacing. And in a brick fashion, what I'm going to do is actually just rotate this 90 degrees, so then it kind of staggers it. And I could create like 6 layers. Then you get this nice block. Drop down a transform node. I can just center this here. Okay, so we have our stack of bricks. That's more than what I did in the example video, but that's okay. Won't matter. So what we can do here now is essentially we're going to create a centroid point for each of these bounding brick boxes and then copy the high resolution bricks to those to these essentially. What we're going to want to do beforehand actually up here, well, let me show you copying, and then I'll show you how to orient them properly. So I'm going to drop down a connectivity node, and what this does is it just basically transfers a integer attribute to every single geometry that has connecting points. And so we can visualize that by hovering over here, click the eye, click class, and we see that each one of these bricks has a associated integer attribute with it. And that'll be useful for the extract centroid node. I'm going to run over all of these pieces, but I'm going to run over them as a point element because this attribute is a point attribute here. You could change it to primitive if you wanted. It errors out because we need to tell it that the class name was, that the piece attribute was named class. So now we see that we get all of these, and if I template this here, okay, cool. If I template this here, we see that we get a centroid for all of these bricks. So that's handy. We also see that it did transfer our class attribute correctly. Don't really need it, but that's also handy in case you want to sometime instance things to a particular point. But in this case, since we just have this point count, we'll be okay. So I'm going to drop down a point wrangler, and what I'm going to do is create an instance path. What we're going to do is instance these bricks, meaning we're not going to take up more space in memory because we have just 3 bricks to reference, okay? So we're essentially going to randomize these points to each point or reference one of these bricks randomly. And by doing this, that means in Houdini, it's only going to use the memory of these 3 bricks, but right now we have 36. So when we render, it's going to essentially only take up the memory of 3 bricks, but it's still going to be able to render 36 bricks. And you could even do this for like 100 bricks, but you're only having to load up actually 3 bricks in memory when you instance this as a packed object in Houdini. So that being said, if I drop down an instance node, we see that it takes a instance path attribute. You could rename this whatever you want, but nothing happens right now because these previous points don't have an instance path. So in here, if I first make a path prefix, I'm going to just type in a local variable string prefix, and I'm going to create a channel string operator, or parameter, I should say. So if I click this to execute the code, it creates this string parameter. And what I can do is, a lot of times when you instance things, you can instance it through a file path, like a location on your computer. But in Houdini, you can also reference things inside the Houdini file this way by typing an operator, so op, colon, and then the start of the path where it's located in Houdini. The start of our path is the object context, and then we jump in here and we see we have a brick. So I'm just going to type in the path as if it were a file path on my computer. So we start here at the object context, and then we go into the layer brick node, and then we go into brick. And I'm just going to leave it like this because this is our prefix here. But we're going, I'll type in a 0 as well just to make that easier. But essentially we're going to create a random number on each of our brick points, and then stamp it with a 0, with a 1, 2, or a 3. So that's why we did this prefix first, because now we can create a int at, let's just call it num, is equal to random, so rand. And what this takes in is a random seed. So I can put in the point number, so the point number of the incoming points, plus let's say 38, and this will then generate us a number from 0 to 1, but it's going to be a float number. And what we're going to do is we're going to fit that number, which we already know its bounds is 0, 1, so we can use the fit 0, 1 function. And that fit 0, 1 function takes in this resulting number, which is just going to be a number from 0 to 1, and we can fit that number to whatever range we want. So the lowest range we'd want is the number 1, and the highest we'd want is the number 3. But in this case, we're going to just do 3 plus 1, which would essentially be 4, because the random number will generate up to that point, but we're going to floor it, floor the float value, so we will actually just want to put a 4 there. So we have this function right here, and on top of that, we're actually going to nest it inside another function called int. So it's just basically taking that float value and it's going to chop off what's after the decimal and convert it to a number. So now that we're executing that here, what we can do is just visualize that in our geometry spreadsheet. We see that num, it's assigned a random number, 1, 2, or 3, to this attribute. Now, I don't actually need to make that attribute one on the geometry spreadsheet anymore, so I can just make it local by typing in int num. I just did that for debugging purposes to make sure it's working. Now what we can do is type in, we are going to make this a string attribute that is written to our geometry. So s at instance path is equal to our prefix. And in Vex, we can concatenate strings easily by just using a plus operator. So plus, and then I'm going to use a function that's int to a, which means convert the int to an alpha character. And we just enter in our num. And now we get an instance path that is instancing either brick 1, 2, or 3. So now if we click on this instance node, it instances those high resolution bricks onto our stacks. However, the orientation is not correct because Houdini needs a set of vectors or an attribute in order to give it a proper orientation. And there's an easy way that we can do that. And this is what I wanted to show you beforehand up here. Before we do any of these transforms, let's go back up here to our box. And I'm going to just drop down a null just to kind of encapsulate this in here so it feeds down to all these others. I'm going to just create an up attribute. So vector at up is equal to 0, 1, 0. So that's the y direction. And a normal, so which is equal to 0, 0, 1. Okay, so it's the Z and Y direction. So now that it has two vectors to formulate a proper direction, these transforms are going to take those vectors and transform them properly. We see we can toggle on our normals, and let me toggle on this up vector. Okay, so we see we have our up vector and our normals. When we transform them, we see our normals are transformed properly. When we come down here to our extract centroid, we see that they are erased. So what we need to do is transfer those attributes. So up and normal. And now those attributes will be properly set onto our points. So then when we do instance our high resolution geometry bricks, we now have oriented bricks exactly how we would want them. You do see here though, like depending on which brick you get, this brick looks identical to this. So what you could do is you could also randomly flip maybe the normal or the up vector in order to, again, vary things just slightly. So we did our instance path here. And maybe we could do another point wrangle and just do a quick if random at point number. So this is going to create a value from 0 to 1. If that plus a random value, just to kind of give it a better randomness, if that is less than 0.5, so basically about half of these bricks are going to be changed. Let's just take our up vector and times it times equal by -1. And that way we again vary some of these bricks, and we see it flipped some of the bricks. And if you don't like that, again, you can always change the seed. So we can also add in here a float parameter, execute that there, and we can always just randomize it. So then we can get exactly the look we want. So maybe right here, I see that this is flipped this way and that's flipped that way. So now we have a good instance of all these different bricks, and you could do the same with the normal, again, just to add some more variation. But yeah, now we have these high resolution bricks that are packed geos. So it's only going to take up 3 bricks in memory space. I can drop this down here at the end. And yeah, with our layer brick, we could then assign its old brick material that we had made previously with materials brick. And I have a second camera here. And finally, we can just test it in Mantra. Remember our quick marks, I'm going to jump back to, I did some different tests here. But in our classic, I'm going to render just the layer brick layer. Camera 2, hit render. It's going to take a sec to load up. There we go. So what we have done is we have essentially taken really high resolution bricks and we've laid them out in a big stack. You could then create all different types of things with this type of a setup. This was just a simple example of showing, a stack of bricks. But then on top of that, you could create a whole wall and instance all these bricks here, and it would do it in a very efficient manner and be varied. If you want more variation in your bricks, you could just make maybe 3 more bricks and have 6 different types of bricks that are then instanced, and it still wouldn't be crazy heavy on your machine. This is the way I would go about tackling this with such a high resolution brick mesh. Obviously, there's other approaches if you wanted to go different ways of actually texturing and doing a different brick. But I would suggest if you want something just quick and dirty, brute force, get this done, this is kind of the way I would go about it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this and it was able to help you enhance your Houdini skills. I just wanted to do a quick plug that soon I'm going to be kind of opening up a little Patreon and maybe doing some advanced tutorials on there, kind of keeping it good with having some good free content, but then I also want to expand things, and I'm curious what types of things you would like to see. So if you can comment below so I can get some ideas on what Houdini tasks, what 3D tasks you guys are wanting to see the most. I would love to hear in the comments below. So let me know, and we'll see you guys later.